Sometimes, the loudest sound in a city isn't a siren. It's the moment the truth makes every siren fall silent. The late afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the crowded parking lot outside Brookstone Plaza, where shopping carts rattled across the pavement and families loaded groceries into SUVs before heading home. It looked like any ordinary Thursday in suburban Georgia, the kind of peaceful afternoon where nothing unexpected was supposed to happen. Children laughed beside pickup trucks. An elderly couple debated which highway would avoid rush hour traffic. And somewhere in the distance an ice cream truck drifted through the neighborhood, its cheerful melody blending into the warm summer air. Then everything changed with a single accusation. Officer Ryan Walker stepped out of his patrol cruiser with the confidence of a man who believed every decision he made would be accepted without question. His polished badge reflected the sunlight as he crossed the parking lot toward a black woman standing beside a dark gray Cadillac Escalade. Ava Brooks had just unlocked the driver's door, balancing a leather portfolio beneath one arm while her car keys rested quietly in her hand. She wore a navy blazer over a simple white blouse, tailored slacks, and comfortable shoes that suggested practicality instead of luxury. Nothing about her appearance demanded attention, yet something about the expensive SUV seemed to catch Ryan's eye. He slowed his pace, studying her for several seconds before speaking loud enough for nearby shoppers to hear. "Step away from the vehicle." His voice carried across the parking lot like an unexpected thunderclap. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. Shopping carts froze in place. Ava looked toward the officer without panic, her expression calm, almost unreadable. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked politely. Ryan glanced at the Escalade before looking back at her. This vehicle was reported as matching one connected to recent theft investigations. He paused deliberately, letting the words settle into the growing silence. "I'm going to need proof that this belongs to you." A young father loading groceries nearby instinctively moved his children closer. Several customers reached for their phones, sensing the possibility of another dramatic encounter destined for social media before the day was over. Ava nodded once, neither offended nor intimidated. "I'd be happy to cooperate," she replied evenly. "My identification is inside my wallet." Ryan raised a hand before she could move. "Don't reach for anything yet." The firmness in his voice immediately shifted the atmosphere. Curious whispers spread through the crowd like wind through dry leaves. Someone quietly wondered whether the luxury SUV had really been stolen. Another person murmured that criminals often looked completely ordinary. Ava remained perfectly still, her eyes never leaving Ryan's face. She had seen suspicion before. She had heard assumptions disguised as certainty. She understood how quickly strangers could become a jury without knowing a single fact. Yet there was something almost unusual about her composure. She wasn't arguing. She wasn't pleading. She wasn't trying to convince anyone. Instead, she seemed to be watching every detail unfolding around her as though she had expected this moment long before Officer Walker ever stepped out of his cruiser. Ryan interpreted her silence as hesitation. "Funny," he said with a faint smile that never reached his eyes. "Most car thieves have a story ready by now." A few uneasy laughs escaped from somewhere within the gathering crowd. Ava simply looked toward the patrol car, then back at the officer. "Are you certain," she asked softly, "that this is the direction you wanted A to go?" Ryan folded his arms, convinced he was completely in control. Around them, more patrol units could already be heard approaching from several blocks away, their distant sirens echoing through the city, while no one standing in that parking lot. Not the shoppers, not the bystanders, and certainly not Officer Ryan Walker, had the slightest idea that within minutes, every one of those sirens would stop for the same woman they believed had stolen a car. A second patrol vehicle rolled quietly into the parking lot, followed by a third, their emergency lights flashing without urgency as officers stepped out and scanned the growing crowd. The atmosphere shifted once again, not because anyone had witnessed a crime, but because the sight of additional uniforms made assumptions feel more believable. People instinctively trusted numbers. If 3 officers had arrived, surely something serious had happened. Ryan Walker noticed the effect immediately. He straightened his shoulders and spoke with even greater confidence, aware that every pair of eyes now looked to him for answers. "Secure the area," he instructed one of the responding officers. "We are verifying ownership of the vehicle." His words spread through the crowd faster than any official report could have. Within seconds, whispers transformed into quiet conclusions. Someone claimed they had seen similar luxury vehicles stolen across the county. Another insisted organized theft rings often operated in broad daylight because they appeared confident. None of them knew Ava Brooks. None of them had spoken to her. Yet opinions formed as quickly as shadows moved across the pavement. Ava remained exactly where she stood beside the Escalade, her hands visible, her breathing steady, her posture relaxed despite dozens of curious strangers studying every movement she made. She looked less like someone trapped in a confrontation and more like someone patiently waiting for an appointment to begin. Ryan found her calmness strangely unsettling. Most people became defensive under pressure. Some argued. Others pleaded. Ava didn't either. It felt almost rehearsed, and that only strengthened his suspicion. "You seem unusually comfortable," Ryan remarked. "People who have nothing to hide usually answer questions faster." Ava offered a polite smile that revealed neither fear nor frustration. "People who understand procedures usually know that patience saves everyone time," she answered quietly. Her response drew puzzled expressions from several nearby officers. It was not argumentative. It was not disrespectful. Yet something about the confidence behind those words lingered in the air. Ryan dismissed it with a brief shake of his head. "Registration." Ava nodded toward the driver's seat. Inside the center console, Ryan motioned to another officer instead of allowing her to retrieve it herself. The younger officer carefully opened the vehicle and looked exactly where she had indicated. Within moments, he found the registration documents. He glanced down, then back toward Ryan. "The paperwork matches the license plate, sir." Ryan frowned. "Check the name." The officer read silently before answering. "Registered owner, Ava Brooks." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across a few faces in the crowd. A woman pushing a shopping cart quietly lowered her phone. A man who had confidently predicted an arrest suddenly stopped speaking. Ryan, however, refused to retreat. "Registration proves ownership on paper," he said firmly. "It does not explain everything." Ava simply watched him, saying nothing. Her silence was beginning to influence the crowd in unexpected ways. The louder Ryan became, the calmer she appeared. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Nearby, one little boy tugged gently on his mother's sleeve. "Mom," he whispered, "if she owns the car, why are they still asking?" His mother hesitated before answering because she did not know. The question seemed to hang over the entire parking lot. Even the responding officers exchanged brief glances without speaking. Then another detail quietly entered the scene. Resting on the front passenger seat was a plain black folder, worn from use, without logos or markings of any kind. It looked ordinary enough that almost everyone ignored it. Everyone except Ava. For the first time since Ryan had approached her, her eyes shifted toward that folder for less than a second before returning to him. It was a movement so small that most people never noticed it, but one veteran officer standing near the second cruiser did. He followed her glance, studying the unremarkable folder with growing curiosity, unaware that inside it rested documents connected to an operation far larger than a disputed vehicle in a suburban parking lot. A light breeze carried the scent of fresh asphalt and cut grass through the parking lot, but almost no one noticed anymore. Every conversation had narrowed into a single point of focus. Ava Brooks, the woman standing beside the luxury sport utility vehicle, had become the center of a story that strangers believed they already understood. Ryan Walker slowly circled the Escalade, studying every detail as though the polished paint itself might reveal a hidden secret. He examined the license plate again, glanced through the tinted windows, and checked the vehicle identification number displayed near the windshield. Every number matched the registration already resting in the younger officer's hands. Instead of easing the tension, each confirmation seemed to make Ryan more determined to uncover something else. "Run the registration through every available database," he instructed. "Insurance, title history, recent transfers, everything." The younger officer nodded and stepped toward his patrol vehicle, speaking quietly into his radio. Moments later, information began appearing on the computer terminal inside the cruiser. Insurance active. Registration current. No theft reports. No outstanding alerts. The officer frowned slightly before looking back toward Ryan. "Everything comes back clean." Ryan did not respond immediately. He watched Ava instead. She stood exactly where she had been from the beginning, neither impatient nor relieved. Her eyes wandered briefly across the parking lot, quietly observing the entrances, the surrounding traffic, and the nearby intersection beyond the shopping center. It was almost as if she were tracking movements that no one else considered important. A black delivery van rolled slowly along the outer lane before disappearing behind another building. Ava noticed it. Ryan did not. A silver sedan entered from the opposite side of the plaza, paused near a pharmacy, then continued without stopping. Ava noticed that one too. She seemed to measure the rhythm of every vehicle entering and leaving the property while maintaining the appearance of someone patiently waiting for routine questions to end. The veteran officer who had earlier noticed the plain black folder found himself watching her more carefully now. Years of experience had taught him that people often revealed themselves through small habits rather than dramatic reactions. Ava never appeared distracted, but she seemed constantly aware. Her attention shifted naturally from one corner of the parking lot to another, never lingering long enough to appear suspicious. It reminded him of someone trained to observe without being observed. Ryan interrupted the silence. "Miss Brooks, why are you looking around so much?" Ava answered without hesitation. "Because people stop paying attention to their surroundings when they become emotionally invested." Several bystanders exchanged uncertain glances. Her words sounded less like an excuse and more like a lesson. Ryan folded his arms. "You speak like someone who has done this before." "Everyone has experience being judged," she replied calmly. "Some people simply learn more from it than others." Another uncomfortable silence settled over the gathering crowd. The younger officer returned carrying a small tablet displaying the vehicle records. "Everything verifies, sir. There are no discrepancies." Ryan studied the screen, visibly frustrated by the absence of evidence supporting his assumptions. Just then, the veteran officer quietly approached the passenger side of the Escalade again. Through the closed window, he could still see the plain black folder resting on the seat exactly where it had been before. Beside it sat an ordinary stainless steel travel mug, a pair of reading glasses, and a folded road map instead of a navigation device. Nothing looked expensive. Nothing looked suspicious. Yet the combination struck him as oddly deliberate, as though every item inside the vehicle had been selected for function rather than appearance. He turned back toward Ava. "May I ask what you do for a living?" he said politely. Ava met his eyes with the same composed expression she had worn all afternoon. "Today," she answered with the faintest hint of a smile. "I am trying very hard not to be late." The answer puzzled everyone standing nearby, except one person. The veteran officer noticed that she had said today, not always. That single word lingered in his mind, quietly planting a question that would soon change everything they believed they understood about the woman standing before them. The veteran officer did not ask another question. Instead, he stepped back and quietly watched the parking lot with fresh eyes, almost mirroring Ava without realizing it. Something about her behavior refused to fit the picture everyone else had already painted. Ryan Walker, however, interpreted the silence very differently. To him, hesitation only meant there were still unanswered questions waiting to be uncovered. "We are not finished here," he announced, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Until every detail is verified, nobody leaves." His words settled over the crowd like another invisible barrier. Several bystanders resumed recording with their phones, convinced they were witnessing the beginning of a dramatic arrest rather than a routine investigation. Ava glanced briefly toward her wristwatch before lowering her arm again. The movement lasted less than a second, but this time the veteran officer noticed another detail. She did not appear worried about herself. She looked concerned about time. There was a difference. "Are you expecting someone?" he asked in a calm voice. Ava answered honestly. "Someone is expecting me." Ryan immediately stepped between them. "Who?" Ava paused for a moment before replying. "People who are depending on me to arrive when I said I would." It sounded simple, yet strangely incomplete. Ryan frowned. "Business meeting? Something more important than that. Can you be specific?" Ava looked directly at him. "Not yet." That answer only deepened Ryan's confidence that he was getting closer to something significant. He turned toward one of the responding officers. "Continue checking her identification history. Driver's license renewals, previous addresses, employment records. I want everything." The officer hesitated. "Sir, we still do not have any indication of criminal activity." Ryan answered without lowering his voice. Then we keep looking until we know why someone is protecting themselves this carefully. Across the parking lot, the black delivery van appeared again, moving slowly past the entrance before disappearing behind another row of stores. Ava followed it with her eyes for only an instant. A small digital clock mounted above the grocery store entrance displayed 3:26 in bright red numbers. She noticed that too. 3 minutes later, a white utility truck entered from the opposite side of the plaza, paused near the garden center, then continued toward the rear service road. Again, Ava quietly tracked its movement while maintaining the appearance of complete patience. The veteran officer felt a growing sense that she was observing patterns invisible to everyone else. She never stared. She simply collected information. He had seen detectives work that way. He had seen federal investigators work that way. Ordinary people rarely did. A faint vibration came from inside the Escalade. Ryan looked toward the driver's seat. Your phone. Ava nodded once. Probably. Are you expecting a call? Several. From whom? People who assume I am already there. Ryan crossed his arms again. They can wait. For the first time since the encounter began, Ava's expression changed ever so slightly. Not anger. Not fear. Something closer to disappointment. I hope they still can, she said quietly. Those 7 words lingered in the warm afternoon air. Even some of the bystanders stopped whispering. There was a sincerity behind her voice that did not match the image of someone inventing excuses. At that exact moment, the younger officer returned from his patrol cruiser carrying another printed report. Sir, he said cautiously, there is something unusual. Ryan immediately reached for the papers. What did you find? Nothing criminal. The younger officer looked uncertain. Actually, almost nothing at all. Ryan glanced down at the report. Ava Brooks had a valid driver's license. Current vehicle registration. Clean insurance history. No warrants. No criminal record. No civil disputes. Very little employment information. Almost no digital footprint beyond standard public records. It was as though someone had intentionally removed every unnecessary trace, while leaving only enough information to satisfy ordinary background checks. Ryan slowly lowered the report. Instead of convincing him to end the encounter, the absence of answers only strengthened his determination. He looked back at Ava, unaware that the mystery he believed he was uncovering had already begun pulling him toward a truth far larger than a single woman, a single vehicle, or a single afternoon in an ordinary suburban parking lot. Ryan Walker studied the nearly empty report again, turning each page as though another answer might suddenly appear between the lines. There was nothing unusual about Ava Brooks that could be explained through ordinary records, yet nothing about her seemed ordinary anymore. The veteran officer quietly stepped beside him and glanced at the paperwork. Sometimes a clean file is just a clean file, he said. Ryan shook his head. Or it means somebody knows how to stay invisible. Ava listened without interrupting. She had not asked to leave again. She had not protested the continued questions. Instead, her attention briefly shifted toward the black folder resting inside the Escalade before returning to the officers. The movement was almost impossible to notice unless someone had been watching her from the beginning. The veteran officer noticed it again. This time he also noticed that the folder had not moved despite several doors being opened during the inspection. Whatever was inside, she had made no effort to hide it. Ryan followed the veteran officer's gaze toward the passenger seat. What is inside the folder? Ava answered calmly. Work. What kind of work? The kind that becomes less effective when it is delayed. Ryan looked at the folder through the window. Open the vehicle again. The younger officer unlocked the passenger door and carefully lifted the plain black folder from the seat. It felt surprisingly heavy. He placed it on the hood of the patrol cruiser and looked toward Ryan before opening it. Inside were neatly organized documents secured with color-coded tabs. On top rested printed maps marked with handwritten circles and arrows. Beneath them sat several envelopes containing photographs, timelines, and pages filled with license plate numbers. None of the papers displayed an official agency seal. None revealed a company logo. Everything appeared deliberately plain. Ryan picked up one of the maps. It showed several shopping centers connected by carefully drawn routes leading toward nearby highways. Another page listed dates and times beside descriptions of different luxury vehicles. The younger officer frowned. These look like surveillance notes. Ryan nodded slowly. Exactly. He turned toward Ava. Explain why you have detailed records of expensive vehicles across 3 counties. Ava looked at the folder for only a moment before meeting his eyes again. Because someone has to notice patterns before other people notice consequences. Ryan placed the papers back inside. That is not an answer. It is the only one I can give right now. Around them, the bystanders stretched their necks, hoping to glimpse whatever had suddenly captured the officer's attention. A few whispered that the documents must prove organized crime. Others guessed corporate investigations or insurance fraud. Every theory sounded convincing because nobody possessed enough facts to know otherwise. The veteran officer quietly examined one loose sheet that had slipped from the folder. It contained nothing more than times, locations, and vehicle descriptions written with remarkable precision. Every observation had been recorded to the minute. Every parking lot entrance was labeled. Every route appeared intentional. Whoever created these notes possessed extraordinary patience and discipline. This was not assembled overnight, he murmured almost to himself. Ava heard him. No, she replied softly. It was not. At that same moment, her phone vibrated once more inside the Escalade. Then it vibrated again only seconds later. A third notification followed before the sound stopped completely. Ava did not look toward it this time. She simply closed her eyes for a brief second, as though silently calculating something no one else could see. Far beyond the shopping plaza, another dark sport utility vehicle passed through a traffic light less than 2 miles away. A second vehicle followed exactly 30 seconds later. None of the officers in the parking lot noticed. None of the bystanders noticed. But somewhere, an operation that depended on precise timing had just begun moving without one person who was supposed to be there, while Ryan Walker remained convinced that the most important mystery of the afternoon was standing directly in front of him rather than quietly slipping farther away with every passing minute. The parking lot looked unchanged to everyone else, but Ava Brooks knew the clock had already moved past the point where small delays became expensive mistakes. Every minute she remained standing beside her vehicle allowed another carefully planned sequence to drift farther away from its intended course. She had spent months building patterns from scattered details that meant nothing on their own. A license plate seen twice in different counties. A delivery schedule that shifted by exactly 15 minutes every Thursday. Luxury vehicles appearing in the same shopping centers before disappearing without explanation. Individually, they were ordinary. Together, they formed a picture that very few people had been patient enough to recognize. Ryan Walker closed the black folder and handed it back to the younger officer. None of this explains who you work for, he said firmly. Ava answered with complete honesty. It is not supposed to. Ryan stepped closer, lowering his voice. You expect me to believe you just drive around collecting notes about expensive vehicles as a hobby? No. Then help me understand. Ava glanced toward the road beyond the shopping plaza, where afternoon traffic continued flowing as though nothing unusual had happened. Sometimes the safest way to protect an investigation is to let people underestimate the person conducting it. Ryan studied her face, searching for any sign that she was inventing the story as she spoke. He found none. That almost frustrated him more than open resistance would have. The veteran officer quietly picked up another page from the folder. His eyes moved across columns of dates and handwritten observations before stopping on one repeated phrase appearing throughout the notes. Pattern confirmed. He looked up. These entries were written over several months. Ava nodded once. Yes. You came back to the same locations again and again. Because patterns do not reveal themselves in one afternoon. The veteran officer slowly closed the folder. His instincts, sharpened by decades in law enforcement, were becoming impossible to ignore. Whoever Ava Brooks really was, she had not stumbled into this parking lot by accident. She had arrived here for a reason. Ryan's portable radio suddenly crackled with overlapping voices from dispatch. An officer somewhere across town requested additional units to assist with a suspicious vehicle. Another dispatcher mentioned multiple reports involving luxury sport utility vehicles moving between neighboring jurisdictions. The transmissions were routine enough that Ryan barely paid attention. Ava did. She listened to every word without appearing to react. Each radio call seemed to fit inside an invisible timeline only she could see. The veteran officer noticed the subtle change in her expression. Not panic. Calculation. You recognize those locations, do you not? He asked quietly. Ava met his eyes. I recognize the timing. Before he could ask another question, Ryan interrupted. Dispatch reports happen every day. Yes, Ava replied calmly. Some are connected. Ryan folded his arms. Connected to what? Ava remained silent for several seconds before answering. To decisions that were made long before any of us arrived here. A brief silence followed. Even several bystanders, since the conversation had shifted away from a simple vehicle stop into something none of them fully understood. Then the younger officer approached holding Ava's phone, which had remained inside the Escalade. Sir, he said cautiously, it has received 6 missed calls in less than 10 minutes. Ryan extended his hand. Who keeps calling? The younger officer looked at the screen. Every notification displayed the same information. No personal name. No company. Only a secure contact identifier without a telephone number. Ryan frowned. Blocked identification? Ava shook her head gently. Protected. Answer it. I cannot. Why not? Because if I answer now, several people will immediately know I have been delayed. Ryan looked confused. Would that be a problem? Ava took a slow breath before replying. For me, no. She paused, allowing the weight of the next sentence to settle naturally between them. For the people who have spent months waiting for today, it might change everything. The veteran officer looked from the phone to the folder and then back to Ava. Piece by piece, the scattered details were beginning to fit together. And for the first time that afternoon, he wondered whether the woman standing quietly in front of them had never been the subject of an investigation at all, but the person leading one that nobody in the parking lot had even known existed. The veteran officer slowly handed the phone back to the younger officer without taking his eyes off Ava Brooks. Every instinct he had developed over 3 decades in uniform was telling him that this situation no longer belonged to an ordinary patrol stop. Ryan Walker, however, remained determined to reach his own conclusion. Enough with the riddles, he said firmly. If you have the authority you keep implying, prove it. The parking lot became so quiet that even the distant traffic seemed to fade into the background. Dozens of people waited for Ava to respond. Instead of speaking immediately, she reached into the inside pocket of her blazer with slow, deliberate movements after Ryan gave a brief, not allowing her to do so. She removed a slim black leather credential holder that looked almost identical to an ordinary wallet. There were no flashy markings on the outside, no bold lettering, nothing designed to attract attention. She held it in both hands for a moment before opening it. Ryan expected to see another driver's license or perhaps a business identification card. What he saw instead erased the confidence from his expression almost instantly. Inside rested a federal credential bearing security features unlike any identification he encountered during routine patrol work. The photograph was unmistakably Ava Brooks. The title beneath her name identified her as an undercover federal task force investigator assigned to a multi-agency operation. Additional markings indicated restricted access far beyond local jurisdiction. Ryan stared silently, reading the credential once, then again, as though the words might somehow rearrange themselves into something easier to understand. The veteran officer leaned forward just enough to recognize the insignia before quietly taking one step backward. His posture changed immediately. The younger officer noticed the change and instinctively lowered his own voice. Ava calmly closed the credential holder and slipped it back into her pocket. She had not raised her voice. She had not demanded respect. She had simply answered the question Ryan had asked. This, Ryan finally managed to say. Why did you not show me this sooner? Ava looked at him with the same calm expression she had maintained since the beginning. Because undercover credentials are protected for a reason. Displaying them publicly ends investigations, compromises operations, and places other people at risk. I was hoping this would end before that became necessary. Before Ryan could answer, every portable radio carried by the officers crackled at exactly the same moment. A calm but unmistakably urgent voice came across the dispatch channel. All local units, immediately clear primary channel. Federal coordination now in effect. Repeat, clear primary channel immediately. One transmission followed another with extraordinary speed. Nearby patrol vehicles stopped broadcasting routine traffic. Dispatch acknowledgments became shorter. Several channels suddenly fell silent altogether. Around the parking lot, the familiar rhythm of police communication disappeared as if someone had lowered the volume on the entire block. Even the patrol cars that had been arriving moments earlier no longer activated their sirens as they approached nearby intersections. The veteran officer slowly looked toward Ava. "They were waiting for your confirmation." She nodded gently. "They were waiting to know why I had stopped moving." Ryan turned toward his patrol cruiser, where the radio screen now displayed a temporary Federal Communications notice replacing the ordinary dispatch information. His hands remained frozen on the edge of the open driver's door. The bystanders had no idea what the technical messages meant, but they understood one thing immediately. Every officer standing in that parking lot had stopped treating Ava Brooks like a suspect. The atmosphere changed without a single dramatic command. There were no raised voices, no celebration, only quiet realization. Ryan looked back at Ava, his certainty replaced by disbelief. She spoke softly enough that only the officers nearest to her could hear. "I never needed special treatment, Officer Walker. I only needed enough time to keep the people we were following from disappearing." As those words settled over the silent parking lot, everyone present finally understood that the investigation they had witnessed all afternoon had never truly been about one woman or one vehicle. They had simply interrupted a much larger story that had been unfolding long before the first patrol car entered the plaza. Ryan Walker stood motionless beside his patrol cruiser, the confidence that had carried him through the afternoon replaced by a quiet realization that every assumption he had made had pushed him farther away from the truth. The younger officer carefully returned the black folder to Ava Brooks without opening it again. This time, he did not treat it as suspicious evidence. He handled it like something that belonged exactly where it had always been. The veteran officer removed his cap for a brief moment, a gesture of professional respect that needed no explanation. Around them, the crowd sensed the shift immediately. Phones that had been pointed toward Ava now slowly lowered. Conversations faded into uncomfortable silence as people replayed the last hour in their minds, wondering how quickly certainty had turned into embarrassment. A black sport utility vehicle with discreet government plates entered the parking lot from the rear service road, without lights or sirens. It was followed by another identical vehicle that parked several spaces away. Men and women dressed in ordinary business attire stepped out carrying nothing that identified them to the public. Yet every local officer instantly recognized the quiet professionalism in the way they moved. One of them approached Ava with a calm expression. "We have adjusted the operation," he said. "Secondary teams maintained visual contact after your signal stopped." Ava nodded once. "Any losses?" "A delay," he answered. "Not a failure." Relief crossed her face. For the first time that afternoon, subtle enough that only the veteran officer noticed it. Months of preparation had not been erased. The plan had bent without breaking. The lead federal supervisor then turned toward Ryan Walker. His tone remained respectful but unmistakably firm. "Officer, thank you for securing the scene. From this point forward, our office will assume responsibility for matters connected to this investigation." Ryan swallowed quietly before answering. "I understand." There was no argument left to make. No explanation that could erase what had already happened. The supervisor accepted the black folder from Ava and briefly reviewed one of the maps inside. "Your observations match the movement exactly," he said. The alternate route confirmed everything. Ava allowed herself a small smile. "Patterns rarely disappear. They usually adapt." The supervisor closed the folder. "That is why we asked for you." Nearby, several local officers exchanged surprised glances. None of them had realized that the quiet woman standing alone beside an ordinary parking space had been the person responsible for months of patient surveillance. She had never needed dramatic authority. She had earned trust through discipline, consistency, and careful observation. Ryan looked toward the Escalade, then back at Ava. "I believed I was protecting the public," he admitted quietly. Ava met his eyes without anger. Protecting the public always begins with gathering the complete picture before reaching a conclusion. The words were spoken without accusation, making them even harder to forget. The veteran officer placed a reassuring hand on Ryan's shoulder for only a second before letting it fall away. "Every officer has a day that teaches the lesson they never expected," he said softly. "The important part is deciding what you become after it." Ryan nodded slowly, unable to disagree. Across the parking lot, the bystanders quietly returned to loading groceries, helping children into vehicles, and finishing errands that had been interrupted by assumptions rather than facts. Several people who had recorded the encounter simply slipped their phones back into their pockets without posting anything. Somehow the moment no longer felt like entertainment. It felt personal. Ava accepted the keys to her vehicle from the younger officer, who apologized with sincere respect. She thanked him with a simple nod, then looked once toward the road stretching beyond the shopping center. Traffic continued flowing beneath the warm Georgia sun exactly as it had before the first patrol car arrived. The difference was invisible to everyone driving past. Yet for the people who had stood in that parking lot, the afternoon would always be remembered as the day when silence carried more authority than raised voices, and careful truth quietly reshaped every conclusion that had seemed certain only minutes before. The last federal vehicle disappeared beyond the intersection without attracting attention, blending into ordinary afternoon traffic as though nothing remarkable had happened. Within minutes, the parking lot slowly returned to its familiar rhythm. Shopping carts rolled across the pavement. Engines started. Families continued with errands that had briefly been interrupted by a story they would remember for years. Only those who had witnessed the entire encounter understood how dramatically the afternoon had changed without a single dramatic confrontation. Ava Brooks placed the black folder back onto the passenger seat of her Escalade exactly where it had rested before everything began. She adjusted it carefully, started the engine, and paused for one final moment before driving away. Her work was not finished. One unexpected delay had altered the schedule, but the mission continued because the purpose had always been larger than one mistaken traffic stop or one misunderstanding in a shopping center parking lot. She looked once through the rearview mirror, then calmly pulled onto the boulevard and disappeared into the steady flow of Georgia traffic, heading toward responsibilities that very few people would ever know existed. Behind her, Ryan Walker remained standing beside his patrol cruiser long after everyone else had begun returning to normal. The afternoon replayed itself in his mind one decision at a time. He remembered the confidence with which he had approached Ava. He remembered the certainty in his own assumptions. He remembered how quickly strangers had accepted those assumptions simply because they had come from someone wearing a badge. For the first time in many years, Ryan realized that authority alone could never replace careful judgment. The veteran officer walked over and stood beside him without speaking for several moments. Finally, he said, "The hardest lessons in this profession are rarely taught inside a classroom." Ryan nodded slowly. "I kept searching for evidence that confirmed what I already believed. That happens more often than people admit," the veteran officer replied. "The difference is whether we learn enough to stop doing it." Ryan looked across the now peaceful parking lot where nothing remained except ordinary shoppers finishing ordinary afternoons. "I almost became the reason someone else's work failed," he said quietly. "You almost did," the veteran officer answered honestly. "But now you know why every encounter deserves patience before certainty." Ryan accepted those words without argument because he understood they were true. Days later, the federal supervisor sent a brief letter to the local department thanking the officers who had cooperated once the situation became clear. The letter contained very few operational details, but it confirmed that the investigation had continued successfully after adjusting to the unexpected delay. No names beyond those already involved were included. No headlines appeared. No television interviews followed. The people responsible for protecting complicated investigations rarely searched for public recognition. They simply returned to work. Ryan kept a copy of that letter inside his desk drawer, not as a reward, but as a reminder. Every morning before beginning his shift, he glanced at one sentence that had remained with him long after the parking lot had emptied. Gather the complete picture before reaching the conclusion. It quietly became the principle that guided every conversation, every traffic stop, and every decision that followed. Months later, another rookie officer asked Ryan why he always took extra time before making assumptions during investigations. Ryan smiled thoughtfully before answering. "Because one calm person taught me that facts arrive before conclusions if you are patient enough to let them." Somewhere else, Ava Brooks continued doing the work that required silence more often than recognition. Most people she protected would never know her name. Most investigations she completed would never become public. She accepted that without regret because real service was not measured by applause. It was measured by lives quietly made safer through discipline, integrity, and truth. Sometimes people believe power announces itself with flashing lights, loud voices, or visible authority. But the strongest kind of authority often arrives without any of those things. It stands calmly in the middle of uncertainty, waits for the truth to catch up, and reminds everyone watching that a badge may grant responsibility, but character is what earns lasting respect.